excited to be speaking with you today, predominantly because when I talk to my students, I tell them that the work that we do in the research lab must get translated to practice, must get translated to policy, must get translated to regulations and legislation, which means that we have to figure out how to essentially reduce our scientific language into something that is actionable. So I am a practicing forensic toxicologist. I have a rare designation of being at a university, which makes me a research forensic toxicologist. And so there isn't very many of us around the United States whose sole mission is really to conduct research. So this is my team. I've been funded by the National Institute of Justice since 2014. And I'll give you a little bit of the backstory as to how we got to that decision to study electronic cigarettes, because it's part of a bigger issue around how industries expand, evolve to meet consumer demands and to make money without scientific foundation. So we battle this on a regular basis, and I'm going to begin to unpack what some of that looks like for you as we talk. So my research team right now has 15, 16, depends on the semester, and counting volunteers, et cetera, et cetera. I have about 15 or 16 on my research team. And so we do have a really clear vision and mission statement. So our vision statement really boils down to, we're going to science today for a safer tomorrow. And so that means that we have to be at the edge where decisions are being made in our communities. And so we want to be this beacon for transformative information. Our mission really, right, because I'm at a research institution, I do a lot of teaching, so that means that I'm really creating really courageous scientific leaders. It's a hard space to be in, to be a scientist these days when there is so much backlash on science. And so it's a hard space to be in for scientists. I don't want to stereotype us, but most of us are fairly shy. And maybe a little bit awkward. And so it gets really difficult then to step out into a public forum with non-scientists to talk about what we're doing. So scientists have to be really courageous these days. And you'll see with some of the information that I'm unpacking, I have received death threats. I have received many threats of violence. When I get some kind of communication that's like that, I do have to pass it up to VCU Council and the VCU Police Department, because it's not just a concern of safety to myself and my family, but also to my research team. So because we're creating these courageous scientists, then we need to do that in a space of integrity and care, because we really want transparency in the science so that people can act upon that. So that does mean that we want to have evidence-based decisions. I'm going to start with a little bit of a history of the electronic cigarette to essentially talk about it from, we've been wrestling with this device for a lot longer than what we collectively think we have. So the first electronic cigarette we really think was invented in the late 1800s. And we think the late 1800s because we found this really interesting advertisement about a flame that does not go out in the wind. We found that advertisement in something like Vanity Fair. We know that the first electronic cigarette was invented and patented in 1930. So the tobacco industry has been working for more than 100 years to influence what consumers have access to. And there's a powerful engine there. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why I care so much about nicotine in a little bit. So what we do know that in the 1950s, there were a handful of research scientists who said, hey, you know that smoking causes cancer. So the tobacco industry actually stood up what looked like a very impressive scientific board of research scientists and physicians in the 50s. I'll show you their advertisement in a little bit. And they said, oh, no, smoking is safe. So the research scientists said it's not. So in order to really make a point about this, they took the tar that's in a cigarette and painted it onto the backs of mice, and then took pictures of the tumors that grew on the backs of mice. So that's what that picture is, right? The point of that is that the industry is actively working against scientists like myself, who really wants to expose what is going on inside of the industry. I'm not saying to get rid of vaping. I want to make that very clear. I am saying that consumers need to know what's in the products, what the products are doing, so that they can make informed decisions about what they're consuming. That is right now impossible for the consumer to do, and I'm going to give you a lot of data to support that. So we know that by the time we get to the mid-60s, the tobacco industry, right, you can't really stop the swell of science. So the tobacco industry then said, well, maybe we should put something out that isn't going to cause cancer. So they invented a product in the 60s and launched it, and that product was not marketable. That product, the consumers didn't want that product because, one, it was hard to use, but two, smoking was still really cool. So why would a consumer be interested in consuming a product that was more expensive and harder to get nicotine from? So it was a market failure, and Big Tobacco took it out of the marketplace. I do want to make a pause. I don't want to demonize the device. The device actually has a lot of utility. It is a great way for people to consume their prescription medication. It's a great way, potentially, for people to become compliant in taking their medication. So there's a great research group that's on the medical campus here at VCU. There's actually a handful of research groups that's working on this in terms of how do we take that technology. They've actually been working on the technology longer than we've had vapes, nicotine vapes. How do we use that technology to actually deliver a repeatable dose of a pharmaceutical? They've been working on that for decades. So what we know about the modern electronic cigarette is that it was invented in 2003 in China by a man named Han Lick. He sold his patent to Big Tobacco, and is now a fairly wealthy man because of that. But the modern electronic cigarette, the e-cigarette as we know it, was invented in 2003. It made its way around the world before it even hit the United States. The United States was one of the last countries it came to in 2007, where it came into the United States through the Tobacco Expo in Las Vegas, where it won an award for a novel device. So 2007 is when it comes into the marketplace. 2008, we started seeing other countries make decisions about the electronic cigarette with no scientific foundation, that because the pressure and the burden from people consuming tobacco, smoking tobacco, is in the billions of dollars for every country. And so all countries are trying to reduce that tobacco burden. So Germany and New Zealand, with no scientific data, they increased the cost of a pack of cigarettes. So I was in New Zealand in about 2018. A single pack of cigarettes was $45 US. Right? So the pressure was, we're going to now push people to the electronic cigarette. So the Food and Drug Administration here in the United States had the same plan. They rolled it out, that idea out here on the medical campus at VCU, where they were going to reduce the amount of nicotine in a combustible cigarette to push people to the electronic cigarette with no long-term longitudinal studies as to what the impact was going to be from vaping. Okay? So 2008, we have a number of countries who are making a push here. So between 2008 and 2009, countries, predominantly China, started shipping electronic cigarettes to the United States. The Food and Drug Administration said, whoa, not on our soil, because we regulate tobacco products. So the Food and Drug Administration got sued by the Chinese companies because vaping products are not tobacco products. They are nicotine delivery devices. And they won that argument in the United States court. So the Food and Drug Administration had to let all of those products into the United States. So the Food and Drug Administration can't on their own say, we need to do something about this. They have to have a mandate from Congress and from the president to actually say we're going to regulate an industry. So it wasn't until President Obama signed the Family Smoking Regulation Tobacco Control Act that the Food and Drug Administration could then get busy developing that regulation. So now we have a completely unregulated electronic cigarette marketplace here in the United States. And so much so that in 2016, the term vaping hit, if you monitor new words in the dictionary, so vaping hit the new dictionaries in 2016. It is a cultural phenomenon here in the United States. So because the Food and Drug Administration wasn't able to do something at the federal level in terms of controlling the electronic cigarette, individual states said, we have to do something. Prior to this, you could be a 10-year-old and walk into a shop and buy a vaping device. You could be a 10-year-old and buy vaping devices online, and nobody's going to do any age verification. So every individual state had to make vaping devices illegal for children. So that had to happen. And then most states then had to say, well, if we're not going to allow for vaping, or if we're not going to allow for smoking indoors, then we also should not allow for vaping indoors. So that's how that transpired. 2016, the Food and Drug Administration says, okay, we have some language. So it took nearly a decade for the Food and Drug Administration to identify what those regulations were. They did not roll them out immediately. 2019, Congress said, well, we should have an age threshold for all smoking and vaping devices. So they raised that age to 21. So you have to be 21 in order to purchase smoking, vaping, tobacco products, okay? Now in 2020, right, this is on the heels of Juul becoming a menace, frankly, in our communities. The Trump administration said, we are going to ban flavors in pod devices. I'm going to unpack what that is in a little bit, right? Because flavors are still all over the marketplace. So the Trump administration tried to restrict what was actually happening. All right, so let's back up and talk about the industry and the way they market, right? And again, it's important to talk about tobacco in the bigger landscape of substance use, I think. So we know that the tobacco industry has worked in its time to attract youth. That has been, paramount for them to get new users. So much so that even in the 80s, this is Philip Morris. I found this in a memo written by Philip Morris. Every big tobacco company had some kind of memo like this, which was, we have to get today's teenager on these products. So they were offering salary compensation more and some kind of benefit to salespeople who could figure out how to market to teenagers, put advertisements near high schools, those kinds of things. All right, so we, collectively said, wow, it really is horrible to put a cartoon character and make it attractive to a child, so we stopped that. And that happened in the 90s, right, as big tobacco gets regulated here in the United States. But the tobacco industry still has to make profit, right? They have to. So they had to figure out a more clever way to get to consumers. So now we have subtle marketing. We're having these cool cultural decisions, right? Be cool, right? Everybody wants to fall in love. So, smoke, never fall in love, right? Anyways, so now we have evolved into what we call stealth marketing, right? So this is whether it's online or tobacco industry is actually sponsoring some kind of fair or a festival where they know young people are going to be at. So they're not overtly advertising, but they do put their logos on things. So, right, that subtly works with young people. And this really started with the Japan Tobacco International, which purchased the international arm of R.J. Reynolds. I'm going to unpack why that's important in a little bit. So we know that this industry has lied consistently to the consumer, right? So this is the 50s, right? When the research scientists said, whoa, 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 smoking is dangerous. These are the ads that the tobacco industry started putting out. They started paying doctors to say that smoking is healthy, that smoking doesn't cause cancer. So they paid physicians and scientists to say this. They lied all the way up through the 90s, right? I'm old enough to remember when all of the tobacco giants stood in front of Congress and flat out lied under oath, right? So this is an industry that has to do something for profits. And so this is their current space, right? That vaping is a healthy way to consume. There's a lot of mythology about the nature of vaping. I'm going to unpack some of the challenges and scientifically what we're beginning to understand about vaping. And so the ad you see from the New York Times, that came out last week. And we think that the reason why that came out last week, right, nothing is by accident. So with the reduction of the federal workforce, the tobacco control offices of the CDC and the FDA were abolished. Virginia's tobacco control program is 100% funded by the CDC's tobacco control program. So Virginia, as of the end of April, no longer has a tobacco control program. So what we saw the very next week was Philip Morris International bought the advertising headline above the New York Times banner. So there are now no guardrails for the tobacco industry. So if you have inclination, please contact your representatives about this. There are very important votes that are happening now in Congress. So here's our current problem, is that the Food and Drug Administration, right, they have developed a framework to authorize. They can't approve a product because nicotine is an addictive agent. So they can't approve a product, but they can authorize one for sale. They have only authorized 34 products, period, full stop, 34 products. There are as many as 9,000 to 10,000 different products that are unregulated in the marketplace. This means that right now they are cleverly advertising healthy vaping, right? They are putting vitamins into the vapes. We're now evaluating these in the laboratory. They are gamifying the devices. So you'll see there, the one that's all in green, that your vape device is a pet, and the way to keep your pet alive is to vape, right? Of course, these are marketed to children, right? So the pervasiveness and the insidiousness of this community, of this industry, is really penetrated our young people. So let's back up to policy and regulation are meant to support public safety and public health. And in the absence of strong policy and regulation and the enforcement of those regulations, then we're going to have mythology and quality assurance gaps that are going to arise in our unregulated industries. I'm going to talk very briefly about product evolution, right? Because this is going to very quickly turn to other substance use with regards to electronic cigarettes. So there's been this march, this evolution during the unregulated stage of the vaping industry in the United States. And we've monitored all these. These are the 4 generations that the CDC and the FDA currently recognize. Me and my lab team, we have been screaming at the top of our lungs. There are other versions. There are other generations. Finally, and I'm on these phone calls, and finally I was told, sit down, right? Those vaping devices are meant for using other substances that are not nicotine, and then therefore we will not be discussing them because the only thing that we care about right now is nicotine vaping. So that 4th generation, which is the pod mods like Juul, we really call that the 5th generation. The 4th generation we call the dripper and the dab rig, right? And so the dripper and the dab rig, they took the 3rd generation device, right? Because those coils get really hot, and I'll show you a picture of them in a little bit. those coils get really, really hot, up to 1,000 degrees Celsius. And so dripping your drug right onto that coil will vaporize it. So we noticed that people were taking the mouthpieces off because the mouthpiece was really narrow and putting their drug directly onto that. So you'll see there that yellow ball of stuff is pure THC. The series of pictures on the bottom is kratom. So people were dripping kratom directly onto the coils. But that's messy. They weren't screwing the mouthpiece back on to actually use the vape. They were using then a straw. So the industry said, well, let's widen the mouthpiece. Hence, therefore, drippers and dab rigs, where you can put, you can drip through an eyedropper directly through the mouthpiece, or you can introduce the drug like on the head of a nail into the vaping device. So that's what we have here. That's the dripper and the dab rig. And so I'm beginning to think a lot now about, we've got these big devices. They were a cultural phenomenon. They were sort of sexy, right? So how in the world did we get to the pod, this thing that was about discrete vaping? So the pod that we know is really about nicotine and the Juul. And so what we know is that then introduced into our school systems this nightmare of discrete vaping for nicotine. So again, I'm thinking about how did we get to this tiny vape to hide the fact that we're vaping? So what was a little bit unbeknownst to me at the time, right, because we came in around the second generation doing our research, and so there is something that happens just before the drippers and dab rigs that then tells the story of how we got to the pod. Despite what the shape of them is, they all work the same way. That liquid that is in the device, when you hit the battery on there, whether it's by a button or some devices are you just inhale and it triggers the vape to work, is that coil gets between 200 and 1,000 degrees Celsius hot. So when the liquid hits it, then it immediately evaporates. And this is a really important part. It's not a vapor. When the liquid hits the atmosphere, it draws water out of the atmosphere and forms millions of tiny droplets. So it's what we call a condensation aerosol, all right? So it condenses water out of the atmosphere into millions of droplets, okay? So those millions of droplets are actually important to how the vaping device works. We think that those droplets protect the drug from that really hot 1,000 degrees. Right? So there's a lot of conversation around, oh, well, drugs aren't going to survive. Yeah, they survive very well, actually. So here's why we're concerned about those droplets. You have 3 areas of your respiratory system, right? So your mouth, your lungs, and then at the very ends of your bronchi are these little vesicles called alveoli. That's where oxygen exchange happens. So droplets need to be small enough to get all the way out there to the very ends of your bronchi. All right, so let's draw a picture of this. So these are our droplets, right? So big droplets are going to impact the back of the throat and only go into the upper part of the chest, right? So big droplets cannot make that 90-degree turn, all right? So they're going to get stuck. The user is going to swallow it or cough it up. Medium-sized droplets are only going to penetrate so far into the lungs. It's the tiny droplets that are going to get all the way out to the alveoli where there's oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange. That's where drugs will cross over into the blood system. So we're really concerned about small droplets and how that happens, right? So my research team spends a lot of time in that space. What winds up happening though is, right, I'm sure everybody's heard of popcorn lung. What happens, though, is that those vesicles where carbon dioxide and oxygen exchange happens, those are supposed to be smooth, globular, right? They're supposed to be, right, create a lot of surface area. But when they're constantly bombarded by the chemicals in the vape, it causes injury to that cell and it begins to collapse, okay? And then it begins to inflame. So you're cutting off your airways. All right. So remember, I'm still struggling with how did we get to pods. I think about this in terms of which came first, the chicken or the egg. In this case, the way we got to pods was through the cannabis industry. So in 2010, Chris Volkerts, who is the CEO of Granco Science, this is the home of the Snoop Dogg THC vape pen, he was given a device that was said to have THC in it. He said, I didn't get high because the pen was not optimized for THC. So he then essentially spent the next couple of years perfecting the device to actually aerosolize THC. What was also happening at the same time was a couple of grad students in Berkeley, California, who had an engineering project that was supposed to help humanity. So they said smoking is probably the easy target. So they came up with a product as well that was called the Heat Not Burn. So these guys literally flew from Berkeley, from California to Richmond to meet with the CEOs of Big Tobacco. CEOs of Big Tobacco knew the history, right? I've already told you about that history. They already invented this product in the 60s. Laughed the boys all the way back to California. They went home dejected and they said, well, if nicotine won't have us, cannabis will. So they rolled out their device and it called it PAX. It emerged in the marketplace when Washington and Colorado legalized adult use cannabis in 2012. So after that, it gets market success. People love the PAX device. Remember I told you I was going to talk about Japan Tobacco International and RJ Reynolds? They said, whoa, this thing is really hot in the THC industry. Let's back it back up and put nicotine in it, and they called it Juul. Okay, so that's how we got to the pods, was through the cannabis industry wanting discrete vaping. All right, so let's talk about some quality assurance issues real fast. So we feel very strongly that because that device gets so hot, the coil gets so hot that it's breaking down those metal coils. So there's multiple sources of metal in a vaping device. So you'll see there on the far left, there's a picture of a new coil. These are pictures that my research team took and under a microscope. And so I literally had this one guy that was a master's student. You know those clickers that they use at fairs to count how many people get on the Ferris wheel, right? And so I bought one of those and I gave him a vape. And I said, I need you to trigger this 150 times, and I need you to do that hundreds of times. So he would turn the vape on, click, turn the vape on, count, turn the vape on, count. So he had to do that 150 times for every single vape for about 50 products, right? That's a lot of clicking. He got something of a reputation. Anyways, what you see there is the metal is beginning to flake off at 150 heat cycles. So that means that is going directly into your deep lung tissue. There is some really good research that literally just emerged this week that demonstrates just how much metal is landing in your deep lung tissue from vaping, right? This is one of the issues with vaping and how it injures your deep lung tissue. We have spent a lot of time, because really we're analytical chemists, wondering what is these e-liquid compositions and what are they doing? The industry would tell you that, well, it's water vapor. It's not water vapor. It's vegetable glycerin and propylene glycol. Those two chemicals are used in all kinds of products, from toothpaste to cough syrup. Well, propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin are safe to eat. They are not safe to inhale. Right? They cause lung damage. All of the flavoring chemicals are safe to eat. They are not safe to inhale. I call it the original lie of the tobacco industry. One of our current concerns, of course, are these pod products. A single pod can deliver as much as nicotine as what's in an entire pack of cigarettes. Right? So we got called by a couple of local school systems. They didn't realize that Juul was in the market. They didn't know what a Juul was. They called us and we said, hey, we think kids are putting cocaine in their vapes. And I'm like, let's unpack that, right? And so when we talked them through it, and I said, this is nicotine toxicity, folks. And they weren't sure about that. And I said, well, hey, why don't all the vapes that you confiscate, why don't you send them to me and I'll show you. So hold on to that because I'm going to talk about that project. The Pods are, the pods, they can put so much nicotine in these pods because they partner them with an organic acid. Let me say that again, they partner it with an acid. They partner the nicotine with an acid. They partner the nicotine with an acid that you're inhaling into your deep lung tissue. So, right, so that's why they can get so much nicotine into a pod, is because they form what they very gently call a salt with an organic acid. So we do a lot of work in terms of what's really in these vapes. So the unregulated marketplace, we do this on a regular basis, is that the amount of nicotine that is in an unregulated vape usually widely varies from what's on the package. It can be 2 to 3 times as much as what's on the package, or almost none, right? Because there is nobody watching the unregulated marketplace. We also found a bunch of ethanol in vapes. And I'll tell you, this was serendipitous. There's a 7-Eleven across the street from my office, actually the one that's at Harrison in Maine. So I walk over there to get a cup of coffee, and there's a bunch of vapes on the consumer side of the cash register, because the FDA allows that. And so I'm used to like bubblegum flavored, cupcake flavored vapes. And in the middle of the box was whiskey flavored, and I thought, whiskey? Is that vanilla and caramel, or is that actually whiskey? So I bought it, took it back to the lab, student analyzed, it had ethanol in it. So then I told the student, the most important thing you're going to do today is analyze every single vape we have in the lab for ethanol, because we hadn't been looking for it. So sure enough, we found 11 of the 60 or so products that we had in the lab were more than 10%, some were 20%. We have since then discovered that some vapes are as much as 30% ethanol. That's a problem, and I'll explain that why. You should also attend Elena Holt's talk, I think tomorrow. She's going to unpack the bigger story of the problem with alcohol in vapes. In the early days, we were looking at vitamins in vapes as well. Vitamin vapes are really expensive, $50, $60, $70. In the early days, we found no vitamins. So this was what I call the original lie of the tobacco industry, right? Where they said, hey, we're just using what the FDA generally recognizes as safe for chemicals to be put into food products. So they said, these chemicals are safe. They're safe. The FDA says they're safe. Well, they're not. They're safe to eat. They are not safe to inhale. Almost every single chemical that we have found in a vape is an irritant, toxin, or carcinogen when inhaled. I mean, you couldn't get a bigger lie than that, right? So, and this is just how much the industry really cares about its consumers. So there was a whistleblower inside of Juul who said, hey, we just released 1 million pods that were clearly contaminated. And I saw the pictures of them, they were black. And so the CEO said, don't recall them, they don't know what they're vaping anyways. And so they sent me, they kind of did this halfway kind of analysis to show that they weren't contaminated. I saw the data and I was like, there's no way that they did anything to demonstrate how those products were contaminated. There's no way. So the industry still doesn't really care. So now I'm angry, right? Now I'm angry at the industry all over again, like I need that kind of energy, right? I was trying to let it go. So then I tell my students, well, we're gonna monitor Juul now. I didn't think I had to worry about them. So we did start monitoring them, and we found a chemical called gamma-butyrolactone, GBL. GBL is monitored by the DEA because in small quantities it has been used as the date rape drug. It is in our food products. You will find GBL in wine and cheese and those kinds of things, but it's safe to eat. It is not safe to inhale. It is a solvent that is used as brake cleaner in industrial purposes. So now we're also monitoring, cooling agents. So there's this big push around, oh, we don't know about menthol, menthol is bad. So the industry turned to using synthetic cooling agents. So the first one they started using was a chemical called WS-23. WS-23 was originally invented to be the cooling agent for men's shaving cream and other kinds of personal care products like that. You shouldn't be vaping that. This is actually came from a case that we received where somebody walked, they got pulled, they work in a safety sensitive position at work. They got pulled for a drug test that also requires alcohol testing. He failed the breath test for alcohol. He goes to a clinic and he says, he vapes the entire way because he's nervous. and he walks into the clinic, fails the breath test, and he's like, no, I swear, man, and I was vaping. So because we had a study where we were having people vape ethanol, which Elaine is going to talk about tomorrow, we're easy to find on the internet. So they sent us, the company actually sent us the vaping products, and then we bought a bunch of the same product online and found ridiculous concentrations of ethyl acetate, which is fingernail polish remover. So that is a common ingredient in vapes because it is sweet and it's a solvent. All right, so we believe that it actually caused a positive breath test because ethyl acetate converts to ethanol in the body, in the lung tissue. And we believe that because he was vaping the entire way to the clinic, that there was a buildup of this chemical in his lungs that had converted to alcohol, which caused the false positive. And I told the company, hey, I don't know if this guy had a snoot of whiskey or, you know, or this, but still at the end of the day, I can't tell either way, so it's up to you. So they actually sent the guy back to work and said, hey, you can never use vaping as another excuse again. I'm going to push through these accidental poisonings really quick. We see these on a regular basis in the lab. We probably get an email one every other week or so about people having some kind of adverse event. In the early days before COVID, there was this big issue where there were a lot of people dying from vaping, and the CDC and the FDA wanted to put that on vitamin E acetate that was in gray market THC products. I begged them, do not just put it on that, because this is also happening because of all of the chemicals that's in a vape. If you call it vitamin E acetate, the reason why all of these people had an adverse event, because there were people who had adverse events like collapsed lungs, coma, death, who did not consume THC products. That was in that population. I said, if you call it vitamin E acetate, this will legitimize the rest of the marketplace, and then that's what they did. What we do know about this industry is that there's enough data emerging now that's actually showing that vaping is damaging your DNA. Vaping is actually releasing toxic metals into your deep lung tissue. We know that people who vape have higher risk than what was originally thought of COPD, cardiovascular and respiratory and health issues for athletes and our military. So we know that vaping is problematic. We received this case in from VCU Emergency, right? This was a guy that came in, he was smoking a health supplement, Blue Lotus flower. It was ridiculously concentrated. This is considered the first guy who died from vaping kratom in the United States. Speciosa Guide was essentially a guide for how do you consume kratom. At the time, I wish I'd screenshotted it, but it was harder to do it back then, so I didn't. But this is what Speciosa Guide said, and I had this like literally written in my lab notebook. If you are used to eating 4 grams of metragine, you should smoke 40. That's backwards. So after it became national news that this young man died from vaping kratom, that disappeared off the website. So then we started tracking all of these cases of people vaping CBD and having adverse events. There were pockets of problems all over the United States with our military and small communities, you name it. So we got called actually to most of them to address them. So what is the issue with the cannabis industry, right? So we have essentially three industries in the United States. Here in Virginia, we don't have adult use legal retail. You can grow your own, right? But we don't have adult use retail. So we do have the medical marijuana, and we also have hemp products. Hemp products are not regulated. CBD products are not regulated. You can look at it and see it's got a certificate of analysis on it, and I don't care where you buy it, you cannot believe the certificate of analysis on any CBD product. You buy a vape in any kind of vape shop, tobacco shop, you cannot be confident as to what's in that. So just to highlight this issue, so this is a case where somebody sent us an email, a regular cannabis user, and he said, hey, I'm a student, and I have a lot of anxiety, and so I was told to take CBD products. I bought Diamond CBD, and I don't mind calling them out. because I've had several years of a really interesting relationship with the CEO of Diamond CBD. And he said, listen, I had an adverse, it was horrible. We said, can you send it to us? So he did. We found a really dangerous synthetic cannabinoid in it called 5-fluoro-ADB that's been known to kill tens of thousands of people worldwide. So we don't know where he got it. So we purchased directly from Diamond CBD, not a secondary distributor. And you'll see there, we randomly purchased out of hundreds of products online, randomly purchased. 4 of the products had 5-fluoro-ADB, and 1 had dextromethorphan, which is the active ingredient in over-the-counter cough syrup. So then I had this really public media argument with the CEO of Diamond CBD after we published that. And he spent a lot of time trying to discredit me. So every time he said something nasty about him, I punched up. So Sanjay Gupta from CNN, New York Times multiple times, Chemical and Engineering News, AARP, Men's Health, Consumer Reports, you name it. He said something about me, I went a little bit louder. So the unintended consequence of that was that hundreds of people nationwide started sending us products after they'd had an adverse event. So we got inundated with products. And so the early days, everybody who had an adverse event had one of those dangerous synthetic cannabinoids in it. Then products are becoming more concentrated. So we started seeing people have adverse events from just CBD and high concentrated THC products. And now we're in this space of these new synthetic cannabinoids, Delta 8, Delta 10, THCO, THCP, all of those. And so that's mostly what's in the marketplace now. Lots of adverse events, significantly impacting people for years. So why do we have these synthetic cannabinoids? The bottom fell out of the CBD marketplace. We grew too much of it. So the industry has tens of millions of dollars of pure CBD sitting in their warehouses. And they said, oh, we can't just let it sit there. Let's do something with it. So CBD in acid with thyme and a little bit of heat makes Delta 8 and Delta 9. And so the marketplace just got really, really clever. The cannabis industry got really clever. So then they started calling these hemp-derived because the starting material is CBD from hemp. And so I spout regularly, we have to stop calling these products hemp-derived because it lets the unregulated industry subvert the danger of these products. We have to call them semi-synthetic THC analogs. They're made in people's garages, warehouses, by the industry to make money, full stop. So we monitor all of these. So this product, you'll see here, this is somebody who bought 2 of these honey sticks. It said that was literally how he bought it, with a sticky note wrapped around it that said 45 milligrams of Delta 8. He said he's consumed 1 of them, the entire thing, because it's a honey stick. And so he said he had 4 to 5 hours of horrifying hallucinations. Believe somebody had chopped his legs off. He couldn't dial his phone because all he had were wrists, right? So horrifying hallucinations. He brought us the second one. We analyzed it. 631 milligrams of Delta 8, 204 of Delta 9, 953 of CBD. It was 100% drug. There was no honey in that stick, all right? So these products contain residual solvents. This is an even plant material. They take the drug and spray it on paper, and then they had a cigarette rolling machine, and so they made it look like a cigarette. We got this product in where they go to buy bulk cookies, and they just lay them out on a sheet, like on a cookie sheet, spray drug on them, package them up. So in unclean facilities, so this cookie was still wet, and it had hair and debris in it. This product, THCO, when we received this product, we thought it meant THC 0, meaning there was no THC in it. It came to us through a criminal investigation that I can talk about now because it's been completely through the court system. And so the young man who took this product, was trying to stop smoking and get off of weed. And he said, the manager of this vape store said, hey, you should try THCO, it'll help. It was THCO acetate. And so he consumed 2 or 3 of the gummies out of this pack, had hallucinations, had a schizophrenic break, walked out onto the balcony of his apartment building with a semi-automatic rifle and shot up 2 police cars with the officers in them, who survived, but you can imagine they were angry. So he's arrested. He was essentially chemically lobotomized for 2 years because of his hallucinogenic break. So he was finally able to stand trial about a year ago, where he was found not guilty by reason of insanity. This case was from a young woman. 3 women in Charlottesville went to a vape shop, bought this 2-pack of pre-rolls, came to Brown Island for an outdoor concert. All 3 women took a puff off of the same joint. One woman started having seizures so bad the lead singer stopped her, saw her, stopped the concert so that she could get medical attention. She survived. The other 2 women had no effects. And then, of course, we have seen children die from consuming these products as well, because they're way too concentrated. So now we're seeing these proliferate. They use vape products to test market these new analogs, because they're just jamming pure drug into there. And so it's their test market. If the market sustains it, then they'll put it into other kinds of products. I just talked about this case. This woman, we did not see what she inhaled from the bong was actually not analyzed. They blamed it on, she took a puff of Delta 9. However, what happened was, she was in an abusive relationship. Her boyfriend was pressuring her to calm down and take a hit off of his bong. She did, just to try to quiet him down, because again, he was abusive. And then after she took a hit off of the bong, she stabbed him 37 times. So, right, and so she was also, I think it was a lesser plea agreement because of the circumstances. So again, you don't know what you're buying in the marketplace. The certificates of analysis are all over the place. What they say is in them is not what's in them. The concentrations are completely wrong. And so this is our confiscated vapes project. So we do not identify the school systems. We have the school systems organized by their health district. We ask the kids, where did you get your vape? So you'll see there from friends, purchase them themselves. Remember, you have to be 21 to purchase a vape across the United States. So they're purchasing themselves. Parents and guardians are purchasing them. You see there, 3 kids said they got it from their drug dealer. I mean, come on. So here we have, right, these are just the GC results. These are nicotine products. This is a nicotine product that had twice what was actually on the label. This is a product that, right, this is in the same blister pack, presumably from the same lot. They looked completely different. They analyzed completely different, right? Again, unregulated marketplace, even from the big dogs. 15% of all of the vapes in the last school year contained a THC analog. 15% across the Commonwealth of Virginia. We believe that number is underestimated because we know that there are some school systems that keep what they think is a THC vape for evidentiary purposes. So they turn it to the police. So we believe this is underestimated. And our concern is that teachers have really no idea of knowing whether or not this is a THC vape or a nicotine vape, because they're not marked, right? They're, again, meant for discrete vaping. So if you want this, I'm happy to show you this QR code later so that you can see what's actually in all of the vaping products that we've analyzed. So in the 1800s, cannabis was actually regulated federally. It was in the United States Pharmacopoeia. If it was in the United States Pharmacopoeia, then you had to assure the quality of it if it was listed in the United States Pharmacopoeia. So in the 1800s, cannabis was regulated. And then we had our war on drugs. Today, federally, not regulated. And the industry can say whatever they want because it's not federally regulated. So there's nobody stopping it. I have been to the Food and Drug Administration multiple times in their own house and called them out and said, you have not moved fast enough on protecting consumers. People are dying, people are getting hurt. If they survive the adverse event, the rest of their life is changed irreparably Food and Drug Administration has not moved fast enough, but they're very concerned. I mean, come on. I mean, that tells itself, right? So what we know is that the industry is constantly evolving. When my research team publishes, oftentimes what happens, particularly in the tobacco industry, is that we'll publish something, the tobacco industry doesn't like it, so they'll publish another paper, call us out, and try to refute us. And then I publish some again, and then I publish again, right? So there's always this back and forth with the industry because they're constantly evolving. They know what they have to do to make a buck. They know how they have to target. They know what mythology they have to push. They know that nobody's stopping them. So the Food and Drug Administration says you cannot advertise how these products will benefit your health. You cannot do that. They can blog about it though all they want. They just can't advertise. They're two different things. It's a fine hair that they have split there, right? So they can blog about the benefits of vaping. They can blog about the benefits of, these crazy cannabis products. And nobody's stopping them. And then when the scientists come forward, usually we're the crazy ones, right? So, we do have a lot of concern. I've not even presented to you all of the other drugs that we have found in vaping products because it goes back to the fact that an electronic cigarette can be used to vape any kind of substance. There are YouTube videos and Reddit pages that show people how to crush up pills and put them into your vape and what the effects are going to be. You can buy research chemicals online already in the vape because it's easy. It's easy to transport. It just looks like a vape, even though we technically can't be mailing them in the United States. I mean, who's watching? Because our issue is that even though if we have regulation and we have legislation, enforcement is a major problem for us right now. Right? Because it's expensive. We can't educate our way out of this right now. And so we need more support. And more people saying, I need to be educated. I need you to come to this community. Can we talk more about this? We need to have a bigger conversation about vaping and these kinds of products. So huge thanks really always to my research team. I have been blessed for more than a decade to have an amazing team who always just steps in, grinds in, and does the crazy work because we work very fast. Our arc from bench to policy is very, very short. There have been times where I have there's one of my research team has discovered something in the lab, and inside of a week, I have been trying to change policy. So really, I have nothing but my research team to thank for all of the work that they do. Of course, the Virginia Foundation for Healthy Youth, who continues to fund our confiscated vapes project. The National Institute of Justice, who literally went out on a limb and funded that first project and have consistently funded us since then. And then we have support from the National Institutes of Health through one of my collaborators. So those two QR codes take you to some information. It's still in the process of building out a blog where we're going to talk about what some of these issues are and put up educational material. We do generate educational material for the schools. If you want that educational material, just find me or find Alina Holt, who also has access to that folder so that we can get that information to you. And I know I also have Ankita Gola, who I think is in the audience somewhere, where she was. She's going to be presenting a poster as well that's got our most recent update from the Confiscated Vapes project. So on that note, I'm probably over, but I'll hang out for questions. If anybody has a question now, then I'm certainly happy to answer it.
So I also wanted to point out that even nicotine increases suicide risk by 2.5 times. But on a separate note, because they can change the formulation and get under the radar, one of the things I noticed, I did a community scan last year. And I tried to get a nonprofit involved, and anyway, they were all interested, and then at the end, they didn't do it. So I went into several of these convenience stores, and one of the major things I noticed is that most of them are located across from or very near schools.
Right.
And that may be a place where we could start with the legislation.
So there is current legislation, it got signed last summer, that new vape shops have to be more than 1,000 feet from a school.
Okay.
And so I think what we need to take up in the coming legislative cycle is that all of the old vape shops got grandfathered in to stay put.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so I think what we need to do is say, when the leases are up, you gotta be gone. But I'll tell you, that's gonna be a hard argument with no tobacco control program.
True. And one other thing I wanted to ask is, do you think actually a community scan with more data would be, more compelling,
Yes.
if people knew what was in some of those shops?
Yes, we are working really hard right now to get into the community, to share our information, share the data that we're seeing, to expose all of this so that there can be a community groundswell. That's what our hope is. We think that, frankly, our best effort is going to be through the grassroots effort. So again, if you want data and information, we have a way to get onto our updates list and to a folder of information where we dump for public consumption. Yeah.
Just from my experience with teenagers I've interacted with, it seems like there are an abundance of vape shops that do not hesitate to sell to people under 21.
Correct.
And it seems like this is due to sort of this general public perception of vaping being safe, so there's really not a lot of pressure on vape shops to follow the law. So I'm just sort of wondering, we can pass all the laws we want, but if vape shops are just going to be handing this stuff out to every teenager that walks in with impunity, those laws really aren't going to get us anywhere.
Right, it's true. It's that's where our big gap is in the enforcement of the current regulations. So it's expensive, and it's also confusing, right? Because how like if I didn't show you the list of the 34 products that the Food and Drug Administration has authorized, when you walk into a vape store, how are you to know which ones are authorized to be here in the United States and which ones are not? And so this is where, again, I think we've got to have, this public outcry of somebody has to do something. There has to be this grassroots groundswell of we have to do something. And that's also just really hard. We get pushback from parents all the time who believe that, well, vaping is safer than smoking. We're like, well, but safer doesn't mean safe. So, some of our challenge is that, just from the parents alone, the people that these kids are living with themselves. So education at this point is really key. Yeah, I feel you on that.
From one of the school systems who sends you vapes and then you send us back research, we just want to say thanks to you and your team.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I appreciate this presentation because, dang it,
It's a lot to absorb.
yeah, because I vape. I'm not gonna lie to you.
Yeah.
And I've been planning on stopping, and it's not easy.
It's hard. In a lot of ways, they say that it is harder than stopping smoking because you're likely consuming more nicotine.
Yeah. But I appreciate you. Now I want to give you my vape, and then I'm not joking. I'm so serious.
Yeah.
So if you have time, like maybe 5 minutes,
Yeah.
I greatly appreciate
Sure.
it.
Of course.
So So we're gonna go ahead and wrap up, but a final thank you for
Yeah.
speaking today.
Thank you, I appreciate it.